This is Tech for Humans. It's a Bible study from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Seminole. I'm Pastor Keith, and I'm so glad that you are joining us for a study on technology, on the Bible, and everything in between. This is a new kind of study for us, so thank you for being the guinea pig, or at least being brave enough to join us for a bit. We're going to use some things on the screen, kind of like slides, to help communicate the information that I'm hoping to share with you. And I'm also hoping that there will be some interaction too afterwards, after this comes out. I'd love to know your questions. I'd love to know your responses. And so I'll talk a bit more about that at the end. I want to take a moment to share maybe why I am interested in this subject and see if it aligns maybe with why you are interested in this subject, or at least willing to follow along. I'm going to get into an introduction of what I'm talking about when I talk about technology and humans, I guess, so we can get into some basics. There are a couple different questions that we can ask about technology, and there's a couple different ways that I think a Bible study or a church study on technology could go. One of those would be kind of just, what technology is there? What could we use? And how could we use the technology that's in our lives better, more efficiently, so that we are less distracted, so that we are more focused, so that we are healthier, saner, happier, sleep better, and those kind of things, which are important questions. And we will talk about some of those things, but we probably won't talk as much about that as you may like, because we're also going to ask some deeper questions about technology, what its place is, what its meaning is in our lives, in the church, where it shows up in the Bible, because yes, technology is in the Bible, and we'll get to that, and what God is calling for of us and of this world. So I'll just give you the warning now. There are times where I think what we will learn and the view that I'll take will be somewhat critical of technology, or at least certain aspects of technology. So if you love everything about technology uncritically, you may feel some resistance to that, and that's okay. On the other hand, if you hate anything to do with technology, which is unlikely that you'd be able to survive, or at least watch this Bible study online, then you'll probably hear some things that are more positive about technology than you would like to. The point is not to dismiss technology, but also not to accept it uncritically. We're going to try to tangle apart together its place in our lives and its impacts on us. It is not lost on me the irony of tackling an issue where we're calling into question what technology means for us, while at the same time using technology, especially a Bible study which is pre-recorded, and a camera and a laptop, and my son even helped me make like a little Lego clip thing that's holding the camera in place. So technology is all around us, and we're not going to be, we're trying not to be ungrateful for what it gives to us and what it has allowed us to do. But at the same time, there are deep questions about what its role is and what its effect is on us. And so we'll just handle those things as we go, even while using the technology. You might have heard of the phrase when someone talks about building an airplane while it's in flight. We might be taking apart the airplane while it's in flight as we go in this Bible study. I don't know. We'll find out together. There are a couple different, well, there are many different aspects of technology. We're going to look at, over the next 5 weeks, including tonight, several of these aspects. And each session has a pairing of a couple ideas. And these ideas might be opposites, they might be synonyms, they might be related, they might be in tension. So tonight, the theme is the message and medium. We'll get into that. Next week, we'll get into social media and relationships. After that, screens and entertainment. Then routines and habits. And finally, living and dying. A lot of what we talk about tonight will resurface, though, because we're hitting a little bit more general themes and a preview of the way that we will approach technology and the Bible in this study. The reason that I'm beginning with this idea of message and medium tonight is because I think this is the aspect of the study of technology that has really challenged me and surprised me initially. I think I would describe my attitude to technology for most of my life as very accepting. I'm what you might call a digital native. There has always been a computer in my house as long as I can remember. In fact, I was born in the same year as the Apple Macintosh, really the first available consumer PC available. And so I've always had technology around. And up until more recently, I was operating under an assumption that technology really should just be kind of invisible in our lives. We use it, what we need it to do, but it's what's underneath, what's in our hearts, what's on our minds, which is most important. And the technology just helps get us there and then gets out of the way. And I'm learning that's kind of a naive view of technology. In fact, I'm on record. Quite a while ago, as I was beginning my ministry, I made a website using technology. And I said something like, the gospel message is the message. It's just that the medium changes. So you can think of when the gospel message was communicated orally, just from one person to another. Then with the invention of writing, it could be written down into papyrus or scrolls. Then you had books, which helped spread up the speed of that. Then with the printing press, you could automate that, and all these different things leading to the internet and the ways that we can communicate more rapidly around the world. But that the idea is the message is always the same. And the medium is just kind of the tool you use to get there. And that it doesn't matter as long as you're just using it to communicate the message. The problem with this way of thinking, though, is it fades. It doesn't allow us to really see the impact that the medium that we're using, the tool that we're using, the technology that we're using, the effect that it has on us. So when we use a tool, for example, with communicating the gospel, when we use a particular medium, whether that is spoken, whether that is written, whether that is digital, it's not just the pipes that the message is using. It affects the way that we interact with one another. It affects our relationship with the text and with those around us and with the world. The medium has a much bigger effect. This has actually been known for a while. There was someone, and you may have even heard this phrase, someone named Marshall McLuhan said that the medium is the message. Now, this is somewhat of an overstatement, but what it's trying to tell us is the fact that the ways that we use to communicate, the tools that we use, and the technology that we use transform us, even as we are using them to transform the world around us. Maybe before we go too much further, we should establish a definition of technology. A lot of people use the word technology to mean a lot of different things. So I want to use a very specific definition as we go forward, although it is pretty broad, I think you'll see. And the definition that I'm going to use comes from a man named John Dyer, who wrote a book that we'll be following quite a bit in this study. It's called From the Garden to the City. It's a Christian look, starting at the Garden of Eden, at the use of technology all the way to, the end of the Bible ends at Revelation in a city, the new city, the New Jerusalem. So John Dyer's definition of technology reads like this. Technology is the human activity of using tools to transform God's creation for practical purposes. The human activity of using tools to transform God's creation for practical purposes. Now, if you think about that, you might notice that a lot of things would classify as technology with this definition. A shovel is technology in this definition because it is for the human activity of using a tool to transform God's creation for a practical purpose. Might be tilling the land for crops. But it also extends all the way to, say, computers. We use computers today as a human activity of using a tool to transform God's creation for practical purposes. God's creation, of course, is not just material things as well. So if we're using a computer or a smartphone to transform our relationships with one another, say using social media, communication, those sorts of things, that is transforming God's creation. That is technology. Using this definition, you could even say things like, say, language. Language is a kind of technology. Language is a human activity. It's the tool that we use when we speak to transform God's creation for practical purposes. So this is a very broad definition of technology, but notice that it is centered both in human activity, what we do, or how we work together, but also related back to God's creation, indicating that there is a purpose, there is a reason, there is a calling for us as humans. So this will be a particularly Christian look at technology. We could come up with some examples, and it might help. I used the example already of a shovel. That's in John Dyer's book. That is an example that he uses quite a bit. He also uses another example just to dive into the middle of this, to give you an example of the kind of conversations that I hope we have in this study. Let's talk about the issue of online giving. By that I mean the way that many churches, especially since COVID began, have allowed or completely switched to online giving of offerings instead of, or in addition to, the traditional collection of offerings in person during a worship service. You might think, and if you'd asked me not that long ago, I would have said that the technology doesn't really matter that much. What's important is that people are able to give. They're connected, and this is not a study on stewardship, but I won't get into it. But giving is something that is both God-centered and human-centered, right? It is about God's creation, but it's also about us. And for someone to give a certain amount of their tithes and offerings to the church is an activity that can be accomplished by, in the old days, dropping a amount of money or check in the plate, the offering plate. Now we can do that using technology, credit cards, online. Someone can give from home or wherever they are without having to be there in person. Now, we can think a little bit about how the technology has allowed someone to accomplish the exact same end result, which is that when you give, you want the church or whoever you're giving to receive a certain amount of money. And at the end of the day, if you give, for example, to Good Shepherd online, we get the exact same amount of money set maybe a 2.5 to 3% processing fee of what you would have, what we would have gotten had you given the, you could say the old-fashioned way, but it's just the normal way of giving, right? Dropping an envelope in the plate. So the end result is the same, and the intention is the same. In both cases, someone wants to give, and they are enabled to give through whatever technology. But in another sense, there is a difference. Let me read you a quote from Dyer's book. He says, while the content in both forms of giving is the same, it's the money, and both are good and God-honoring, there are non-neutral differences between the two that disciple us in distinct ways and alter how we relate to ourselves, our community, and even God. There are differences if we give online versus how we give in person. For example, when you give in person, it is a public activity. Dropping money in the plate in front of your peers, in front of people around you, allows them to see what you are doing. It allows, say, children to see that pattern of giving in ways that maybe children don't see when we give online. Now, again, I'm not here to say which is better or which is worse. And in fact, in our congregation, both of these are wonderful and appropriate ways of giving. But the point is that the technology is not neutral here. It does change some things about us and how we relate to what we are doing. There are differences when we give online, when it becomes a more private activity, or it could become more private because of the way that we do online giving. About how it can be taken out of the context of worship. Maybe that changes the way we think about it too. So you see what I'm getting at here. Again, I'm not trying to critique a particular practice or say we should go back to the old way or we should only do the new way. What I'm hoping to communicate is that there are some differences, that technology is not, and indeed is never, neutral in its effect on us. Even as we use it, it transforms us at the same time. Dyer says, in fact, whenever we use a tool, whether it be a shovel or a phone, 3 powerful stories unfold. How we shape the world with technology, how technology shapes us, and how we see the world through technology. There are 3 stories here that we are going to look at as we go through this study on technology. How we use a tool or technology, how that tool or technology uses us or affects us, transforms us, but then also what it means. One of the meaning questions that we need to ask in any use of technology as faithful Christians, as disciples, is the meaning compatible with our faith? Or is the meaning of what we're doing in a way replacing God? Are we acting out of our relationship with God and using technology, which is possible, and I hope to show that? Or are we using technology to bypass, to get around God, to help ourselves think that maybe we don't need God, maybe we can do everything on our own? That's where we're going to get into look at the biblical idea of sin and what I've called, and what actually is called in a book by Andy Crouch, which we will learn from too, the idea of superpowers. That there is something that we are looking for from technology that would help us be more than human, and in fact more than what God has called us to be. So to do that, we're going to go back to the Garden of Eden. We're going to look at how it began and what God's purpose is for us. In the very first chapter of Genesis, we read that God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion." Goes on to say dominion over the fish and the creatures of the world, all the animals. But we see right here in the beginning a couple things that are important. One is that we are made in the image of God. So there is something about us that is like God. It does not say that we are to be God or gods, but that we are made in God's image. There's also a job here, a responsibility, that we are to have dominion. In other words, that we have a role in shaping and transforming the earth. If you remember back to that quote about, or our definition of technology is about the human activity of using tools to transform God's creation for a practical purpose. And here in the very beginning, that is evident, this idea that we would have an impact on the world, that we have a job in the world. We have responsibility and care. So could technology be a part of that care? Well, in the second chapter of Genesis, God takes the human, the man, puts him in the Garden of Eden, and he tells him to till it and to keep it. To till and to keep. Now, there are some interesting ideas about these words, and there are different translations. If you look at different Bibles, how that first word, to till, that verb that we are called to do in the garden, to till and to keep it, how that till is translated. Till implies necessarily a use of technology, right? Tilling uses a tool, which in our definition is technology, in order to accomplish, even at the very beginning in the Garden of Eden, even before sin changed our relationship with God, technology was there. Now, it's not a perfect translation, this word till, and in fact, it's just the word in Hebrew that means to serve. And it's used all over the place in the Bible. Nowhere else is it translated as till. Really, in the most literal sense, God tells the man to serve the earth, to serve the garden, and to keep it. But I don't really know how you can work the earth, serve the earth, without using some kind of tool. Technology is here from the very beginning. But then sin enters in. Just in the next chapter, the serpent says to the woman, "You will not die." This is about the fruit, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The serpent tempts them to eat the fruit. "You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." This first temptation is here in the Garden of Eden to gain superpowers, to be more than human, to be as God. We can see both positive and, in fact, a command to use technology for good in the earth. But we also see from the very beginning the temptation to use what is around us to rise above what we are called to be, to use technology to become as God, to have superpowers. There's another way of looking at this idea of our use of technology and what kind of tools mean. The last thing I want to talk about today before we end our session is what I find a helpful distinction between the ideas of instruments and devices. Now, in some sense, instruments and devices are pretty similar. They are both tools of technology. But I want to use these words in the way that Andy Crouch, the author that I mentioned already, has used in a couple of those books. And here is a quote from a lecture that he gave. "There are two kinds of technology, devices and instruments. Devices basically do things for us. They often replace us, so we don't have to do anything when they're doing their thing. And there's a place for devices, but a very small place, because really what I think technology is meant to be is an instrument, which is something that actually helps me as a human being engage more with the world. Here's two different ideas about how technology affects our relationship with the world. In his terminology, a device is something that kind of takes over, that does what we would normally do as humans, that in some sense replaces our relationship with one another or with the world around us. Whereas an instrument, in his terminology, doesn't replace us. It enhances what we already do. We're going to look at a couple examples of things and see that, on the one hand, this terminology between instrument and device is maybe not as black and white as we think it could be. But to get a sense of how our relationships with the world and those around us are affected by technology. So I'm going to show you 3 different pieces of technology that could be called either instruments or devices. But let's see how they work. Well, the first one I want to look at is the organ, the musical organ. And probably if you hear the word instrument, some kind of musical technology is likely the first thing you think of when you hear the word instrument. And this qualifies, I think. What does an organ do in human use? Well, it's an instrument, allows us to make noise, to make music in a different way than we could before the organ. In the context of the church, you could think of before the organ and other instruments like it, the primary instrument used, and maybe it doesn't work in this context, but the primary method of making music was the human voice, was 100% human, totally us, simply using our voices to sing hymns together. That was the earliest Christian use of music. The organ allows us to do things that we couldn't do before. And instrument is a good word for it because the instrument does not replace humans in worship. In fact, it very well might enhance. We don't stop singing when the organ plays in hymns. In fact, many times the organ helps us sing the correct notes that we maybe couldn't find on our own. In this sense, it enhances. It's technology that helps us be as or more human in our worship together. Let's look at another piece of technology. This is an old woodcut of the printing press. In the church context, and especially within the Lutheran context, the printing press has often been talked about as a piece of technology that changed faith, changed church, because it allowed particularly the Bible and other religious texts to be spread much more quickly than they ever were before. This sense, you could see this as really an instrument. It didn't replace writing or communication. It enhanced it, right? Maybe, though, you could find ways that this technology did change our relationship with the written word or with the spoken word. As Bibles became more and more common, became household objects, perhaps that changed our focus on hearing the word. Perhaps it changed our focus on hearing the word together as a group and allowed the Bible to become a much more individual thing for study, which has both good effects and not so good effects. You can see how the technology is never neutral. Let's look at one more piece of technology that would have to be called a device in Andy Crouch's terminology. It's the smartphone. Now, for some reason, I could not find any ancient woodcut pictures of a smartphone. Okay, well, obviously there are none, but I used some AI to generate one. So there you go. There is a woodcut of a smartphone. In contrast to the organ, and to the printing press. The smartphone is a piece of technology that does not have just one or two jobs. It has nearly infinite jobs. In modern computing, and now that we have smartphones, mobile computers with us all the time, at least in our context in North America, we can do so many different things. I was working with a contractor the other day, and she was adding up some measurements on her phone, on the calculator app. And while she was queuing them up, a phone call came in. And I just thought, isn't that funny that her calculator is receiving a phone call? That sentence would not have made sense to anyone 50 years ago. Technology is changing rapidly, and devices like smartphones and computers have opened up whole new worlds. They've also opened up whole new ways that the technology can affect us, even as we are attempting to use it to affect the world. And the way that we use smartphones, the way that we use computers, changes our relationship with the world and with those around us. This is what we are going to be talking about as we finish up this study for today. Keep these things in mind because these themes are going to come up over the next few weeks as we look and drill down into some particular issues to look at these three stories of technology, how we use tools, how the tools affect us, and then what the meaning is behind it. Are the tools helping us be more human? Are they helping us to live out our calling to serve the earth? Or are we using them to replace God and to give ourselves superpowers? You could use inappropriately all the instruments I've shown, from the organ to the printing press to the smartphone. Seems to me there's particular danger or temptation in gaining superpowers from our smartphones. I know because I do it all the time. So typically as these studies end, I will have some questions that I'm interested in hearing your responses to. They're a little bit open-ended this first time, though, because I really have no idea. I've not done this study before, and I've not done this study in this way where I didn't have constant interaction throughout the study. So I just don't know. So I'm throwing up my hands and I'm saying first, what reactions do you have? I'd love to hear what you're thinking about this. I'd love to know what you want to know more about. And as a way of beginning this study, I'd love to know, in what way has technology shaped you? What do you see there? You can post your own questions or answers to some of these questions online. If you're watching this on Facebook, you can just put them right in the comments too. If you're watching it on our website, there is a place to comment below. Put your questions and answers down there. If you see questions and answers of others, feel free to interact to answer their own questions with what you see in your life. And please let me know what is helpful as we move forward into answering these questions and these three stories about technology in our lives. So I'll see you next week, and I look forward to what you have to say.